the slippery slope argument versus the slippery slope fallacy, the unvaccinated versus the vaccine mandates. The date today is 9th of November 2021, and today that's our topic. What more new restrictions are we getting with regards to COVID vaccines, especially for the unvaccinated people? What we have seen since vaccines started becoming more and more compulsory, and we're basically going to talk about this whole idea of a slippery slope argument, right? So what is the slippery slope argument, and in particularly what is the slippery slope fallacy? So a slippery slope is, as you can imagine, it's of course an analogy. You're on a slope, it's slippery, and then you keep sliding downwards, right? So why is it that some of these slippery slope arguments are fallacy? Well, one of the definitions that you can find on the internet, it says that in a slippery slope argument, cause of action is rejected because, with little or no evidence, one insists that it will lead to a chain reaction resulting in an undesirable end or ends. The slippery slope involves an acceptance of a succession of events without direct evidence that this cause of event will happen, right? So the whole basically what we're talking about is, or rather the main question here is whether or not there is evidence with regards to the argument being made, or the slippery slope argument being made, right? So what is the slippery slope argument being made with regards to COVID vaccines? Very early on, I believe, actually not really that long time ago, starting with 10th of August, right, after our National Day, which was postponed, of course. At that point, the decision was that unvaccinated people who are unvaccinated could not dine in restaurants. Now, they could still, for example, dine in hawker centers. They could still enter shopping centers. And if in the event that you really need to dine in a restaurant, you can take some pre-event testing, right? So at a point in time when a slippery slope argument was being made, the idea was to say that, now first you prevent us from, or rather prevent the unvaccinated people from dining in the restaurant. Next step, you're going to prevent them from entering the malls, or even prevent them from taking public transport. And then after that, you might even say that if you're unvaccinated, you can't work, right? So that's you get the idea of the slippery slope, starting with something not so important like dining in a restaurant, and then suddenly you're being banned from entering public places like shopping malls or even public transport, and then finally you can't even work because you're unvaccinated, right? So that was 10th of August, right? I'll be posting some of these links with regards to either from MOM itself or even from some of the Straits Times or Channel News Asia. So people were saying that that won't happen, right? No, it's only dining for the time being. It's not critical, it's not essential. You don't, as a human being, you don't really need to dine in a restaurant. You can always take away, especially COVID is spreading, so save for yourself. Don't mix around in the restaurants where it's supposed to be a high risk, right? So it's not essential. But even at the point, August the 10th, right, there are already news, especially from America, of vaccine mandates, right? So that something similar to our no dining in restaurants unless you're vaccinated kind of rule. But there was also talks of firing or terminating frontline workers, such as not frontline workers but response, right? First responders, like your healthcare workers, like your police, like your firemen, right? So there were already some mandates with regards to America. Of course, not yet in Singapore, But we can see, right? You can see a parallel example where there are already mandates saying that you cannot dine in a restaurant, and then they are moving towards blocking people from working because of their vaccine status. Right. So when at August the 10th, when people were putting out that vaccine, that slippery slope argument with regards to vaccine mandates, we are already seeing it from other countries. Right. So to then label it as a fallacy, yes, in some sense, because we have not seen it happening in Singapore yet. So you can say, oh, Singapore government maybe a little bit more rational. They probably won't go ahead and be so restrict your freedom in such a sense. And so they'll call it a slippery slope fallacy. Now, fast forward to October 20th. What happened? Now the unvaccinated people cannot enter malls. And they aren't even allowed to dine in hawker centers. Right? Previously, you could still dine in hawker centers, 2 packs. Up to 2 packs. Now, of course, there are also certain exceptions in this case. So, with regards to shopping malls especially, so like if you have a medical appointment, or if your child has a class, enrichment class, and you need to send them up to the class, then yes, they will allow you to still go into the malls. Of course, like same as the previous, in August 10, you can do a pre-event testing, and then you could also still participate in this, right? But like I previously mentioned in the video, in the previous video, where I was more focused on what the 5% of people who are actually not vaccinated at all, and I think I made a pretty good case as to how these 5% are not actually the ones who are mostly bringing up the numbers for COVID, right? So, but you see, the whole idea of testing, PET testing and all that, is to test whether the individual has COVID, right? So when you test an individual who is unvaccinated, you're testing whether or not he has COVID. And so the idea here is, if I have COVID and I get tested for positive for COVID, then I should not be able to enter the shopping centers because I'm a carrier of COVID and I can spread it. But then why only put it for unvaccinated people, right? Because a vaccinated individual can also get COVID, and if he is positive for COVID and he goes into a shopping mall, he can also spread COVID, right? And it really seems that the reason why we have so much COVID cases right now in Singapore is because we have vaccinated people who are makes out about 85% of the population, where they actually get the COVID, and then they're spreading to somebody else. Now, this is not to say that people who are unvaccinated will not spread. Obviously, people who are unvaccinated can also spread the virus, and in fact, data seems to say that they are, or rather, as an individual, they will spread the virus more. They are more likely to spread the virus, right? But because there's only 5% of these people, as compared to 85% of the population who are vaccinated, so it seems that based on just numbers, you would be more likely to get the virus from someone who is vaccinated than someone who is not vaccinated, right? So PET doesn't what PET does is that it only tests the individual for COVID. Right, the narrative has always been, oh, you don't want an unvaccinated person to enter into the mall because this person is not vaccinated, he has a high risk of catching the virus, and if he catches the virus, he has a higher risk of getting into a serious illness or maybe even dying. Right, so that was the narrative. PET does not resolve this issue. PET only says that this person, whether or not he has the virus or not, or doesn't carry the virus. Okay, so there's a conflict in terms of the narrative that they are trying to push and the measure that they're trying to implement. Okay, so this is October 20th. Now fast forward to today, 9th of November. I believe, yeah, so I'm taking this from the website of MOM, yeah, from today. So I don't really have the date on when they last published this. But basically the status right now is this. The government is encouraging for every person who is employed to be vaccinated. In the event that you are not vaccinated, the company, private or public, has the right to, or rather should redeploy you to somewhere else where you can actually work from home, so that you don't have to go to office. Right. So, however, in the event that your role, specific role, requires you to work in person all the time, then there's a couple things that you need to do. One, you need to be tested, I believe on a daily basis, maybe, right, at your own cost, which again I think it seems funny, right? So previously we talked about the PET testing. The testing only makes sure that the individual is, whether he or she has the COVID virus or not. So if you want to make sure that the virus doesn't spread, you should be testing everybody. But so, with in particular to the unvaccinated personnel, the cost of the testing should be on the individual. Which, okay, I guess you can make a case for that. Now, the further down the MOM, which I'll put the link again, you'll see that the company actually has the right, considering the individual's role, if he or she cannot be redeployed to another role, such that he or she doesn't have to come to the site to work, the company has then the right to decide whether or not to fire the individual, terminate the individual. Of course, based on you got to give warning, or rather not warning, but you give like a new one month notice or 2 months notice, depending on the role, and then they are allowed to then fire this person or terminate the person, and it will not be considered unlawful termination. Right? That's one. Number two, coming 1st Jan 2022, all public officials, all public servants have to be vaccinated. If not, they will face possibility of termination. Again, based on whether or not they can redeploy to work from home and whatever, all that kind of stuff. Right? So now every single step of slippery slope has been fulfilled. First, you start with no dining in restaurants, no entry to malls. Now you're getting terminated from your job. I guess the only part that hasn't been fulfilled is the banning from public transport, which hopefully you'll never go to that position. Right? But every prediction of that slippery slope has been fulfilled. And it doesn't seem like it's going to stop. Right? And I'm really not sure what the government is, whether or not this is going to be a long-term plan from the government, whether or not it's just for this couple of months and then they'll remove it. Right? But also, and today there's a news that says that there's a differentiation for healthcare, whereby the government will pay for COVID treatment. That means people who catch the virus, test positive for the virus, right? The government will only pay for those who are vaccinated and not for those who are unvaccinated. Right. Firstly, this seems a little bit weird considering that Singapore isn't a welfare state. But so for the government to pay for health treatments, it seems kind of not in line with that. I guess it makes sense from the beginning part where we are not sure about what treatment to give COVID patients, to the people who have caught COVID, and maybe because they are unsure of the treatment, whether or not it's effective or not, so the government then maybe help subsidize or even pay fully for the treatment, right? But 1 year on, where we have a better idea, not fully comprehensive, but they have a better idea of how to treat the virus, which is why they are moving to this position where they say that, oh, if you're unvaccinated, you have to pay for your own treatment, right? Because they are more confident that whatever treatment they're giving will work to a good amount, good extent. But because you are not vaccinated, you're not entitled to this. So right now they're using, instead of using healthcare as a benefit, as a right to the individuals, they're using healthcare as a punishment, right? If you're not vaccinated, they punish you for it, right? So this is going to cause more segregation, more differentiation between the unvaccinated and the vaccinated. So, but the slippery slope doesn't end there, right? There's a follow-up to that. The follow-up being booster shots. And right now, vaccination for kids 5 to 11 years old. Right? And the second one especially is I find that it's troubling. In America, they have already started to push for this vaccination for children 5 to 11. I'm assuming they have already done some research on it. I think vaccination generally is safe. But with regards to children so young, do you really have enough data? You only have how much? 1 year, maybe 2 years of data. Is it sufficient? I don't know. I'm just a layman on this. But why are we pushing it for this age group? And yes, there are kids who do get into a very serious condition, but it's extremely rare. And aren't you putting into more risk by giving them a medication where we don't fully understand the long-term effects? So, I mean, that's my opinion. But it is a slippery slope. That's the continuation of the slippery slope, right? So booster shots, for example, we are seeing the government in Singapore opening up to certain groups of people, especially those who have taken their vaccination 6 months before, right? So the way they are pushing up the vaccination, the booster shots, and also the vaccination for 5 to 11 people is very similar to how they were doing it for the original vaccines, right? They will just give it to some people. They won't push it as compulsory. They say that it's good for you, you should take it, right? There's no guidelines in terms of saying that only people with booster shots can do this, and those that without booster shots cannot do it. But eventually, when more and more people do it, get the booster shots because for whatever reasons, then they start putting in more tight measures, right? So maybe you might see another round of, if you have a booster shot, only with booster shots can you then dine in restaurants. Only in booster shots can you then go into malls. Only with booster shots can you be employed, right? So this slippery slope seems to doesn't seem to end, right? Because with booster shots, right now they are saying every 6 months you're gonna take one. But then you have to consider that, especially with recent cases where we are getting something like 3,000 over cases per day, more and more Singaporeans are getting infected with COVID. Right? When you're infected with COVID, and I won't bring up the Israel study again, shows that you're about 13 times more resistant to the virus, getting reinfected again. So why do you need a booster shot that only lasts you 6 months? Right? So the measures don't really go with the data, and they want you to believe that it is fully backed by science, fully backed by data, but they just leave out some of the nuances that are being studied. And I feel like we should voice our opinion, bring it up to our ministers, tell them to stop, right? Reconsider their position. End of the day, the unvaccinated people are only 5%, and that number is going to get smaller, right? whether or not this 5% eventually go on to get vaccines, or whether or not this 5% eventually get the virus, recover from it, and have natural immunity. That 5% will get smaller and smaller. Is there a need to then enforce this small group of people, segregate them, take away their very basic rights to common places and all the kind of stuff? I don't think it warrants such a measure. Okay, so please, ministers, I don't know how you see this, but hopefully you reconsider your positions.